Hello, welcome back to part 4. Hopefully the final part of painting this time around before we move on to shields. Just thought I'd start with a bit of a recap as to where we are. So you can see here I've got them still sort of aligned into their groups with, let's just move that in there a bit, some of the brighter red tunic guys over here, some of the duller ones here, and then here I've got just a view of what they're looking like, really. So you can see, hopefully you agree with me that that's not looking too bad. We've got good definition on the armour, which, as I said, from tabletop distance is what we're looking for. As you can see, I've put the base coat on, or the primary coat for the brown scabbard and the belts and straps there. Got the wood there done for the spear. Got some of these guys here. This one's obviously a musician. So what I thought I was going to do now was just show you my next stage, which is pretty much everything's got a colour on it now. The only thing I haven't done is taken the black here, which I'll probably redo where I've got the odd chip before I put the highlighting on of the horsehair crest. But basically most of the figure is now covered, certainly with a base, and I think in all cases now we've got a base, a mid coat. And now it's the decision time about whether I'm going to put some highlights on. And for me, this is all about the colour. So on these ones here, and perhaps it's probably easier to see on something like this. Let me just get the camera to play the game. There we go. Possibly, I don't know if you guys can see that, but when we look here, this is got a bit of definition, but it's still looking quite flat. So this is a colour I'm going to target for a bit of highlighting. Some of these ones, again, they're a little bit flat. So for me, highlighting is a very sort of light touch thing. Obviously the clue's in the name, but I have seen figures where people go too white and too much of it, and you end up thinking there's not really a contrast there, everything just looks white. But I think on these ones where we've got a bit of flatness, I'm going to try a bit of highlighting. So I think I'll try with this one first, because I think that will give you the best view in terms of the amount of area that I select for a highlight. So I'll get myself prepped with the right colour of the triad, and this is the moss triad. So we're going to be trying this one here. As you can see, just in the paint itself, that's quite a decent sort of contrast. So I'll get myself prepped and come back and restart the video. Okay, so I've popped a little small amount of the highlight colour into the receptacle, and all we're going to do really is just load a small piece on the brush, and then look to just really lightly touch some of the areas where I'm trying to get a little bit of extra definition, and hopefully you can see that on the video. But it's really just very, for me anyway, I like this to be really subtle. I don't want to see sort of big white lines on the figure. Just want to give the hint that something more might be going on. And like most painting, have a think about where the highlight would catch, and obviously intuitively you would go for the raised areas, and that's going to give you probably the best result. And to be honest, I'm going to stop there. I don't know if you can see that properly on the video, but oops, hopefully you can. I've just picked out a few lighter areas, and maybe the best thing to do is to get the two figures together and see if you can appreciate a subtle contrast. I think I can with the naked eye. As I said, for me it's less is more, I guess. There we go. So I'm going to carry on doing all of the moss, because I think that's quite a flat colour between the two. in the same fashion. Like most things, if you go wrong here and you overdo it, you know, we'll just paint over the base coat. But I would recommend just doing the areas that you've made the mistake on rather than going too mad. And anything you do is repairable. And again, these guys with the tunics rather than armour are going to benefit the most from the highlighting, because there's the biggest amount of area to consider. And quite often, if there's a decent contrast between the mid and the base coat, I won't bother to do a great deal in terms of highlighting. So if we address this figure here, this one you've got to go particularly careful with. And the rationale there is that we've got quite an off-white colour here. The last thing we want to do is make it look like we've overpainted some of the other section rather than provided a highlight, if you see what I mean. As I said, very light touch on these sort of thing. And if you don't want to do this, you'll still get a very good impression on the tabletop, just with having some of that depth from the black. Okay, so yeah, pretty much rinse and repeat for all of them. These ones are going to be a bit of a challenge because we're going to end up looking quite bright. So I might give you guys a quick look at that when I do those. But I'm now going to just carry on around the rest of the figures and come back shortly. Okay, so just before I leave the highlighting, I'm going to try and tackle this really bright red over here. And this time around, it's the Vallejo triad. And I'm going to try and just take the flat red, which is a 957, give it a bit of a shake, put some into the tray there, spreading it all over your fingers in the process. Just clean that off. I really have put that all over my fingers, never mind. So we'll just take this figure here. And the reason I've gone for quite a strong contrast here is because red, as I've said before, is quite a difficult colour when it comes to having a dark undercoat. And I tend to do more layers with red than I think perhaps any other colour. And on this one, I think I'm probably going to almost do a repeat of the mid coat, simply because I want to get a bit more depth, and that's really not coming out on this flat view at the moment. But again, hopefully you can see that that's lifting it. Please ignore my red fingers. Okay, that's a little bit better. And as I've said many times before, I think one of the best things about painting is that you get absorbed in it, and you can't really let the worries of the day get in the way, because you've got too much to think about. But there you go. So that's just a bit of a lifting, I think. don't have too many with a lot of tunics, but if you can see there, look, we're getting a bit more definition. So I'm going to crack on with the rest of those and then see you on the video shortly. Thanks. So just continuing on, we've got the straps here that I'm belt, sorry, let me just get that out of the way. And again, I tend to, with this sort of second coat, just treat this more as a highlight, to be honest, and then pick out some of the higher detail. Again, we're not trying to go too mad here, because we're just trying to pick out the sort of surface of the belt, just make sure that it lifts it a little bit compared to the underneath colour. So I'm not going to go too crazy on all of those. And again, if there's a sort of section of the belt which is higher because it's sort of following the contours of the figure, then make use of it. If not, I tend to go for the front of the chest, the top of the shoulder, just anywhere that would naturally both catch the light, but also just, as I say, help to lift the figure. So yeah, I'm going to carry on doing that. I've done all of the other colours here that you see before you. So I'm going to now just do the belts, finish those off. I'm also going to put a little highlight on the spear end, and then just double check that I've covered everything. And I've still got the black to do, but I'll come back and show you the black because we're going to do the hair as well shortly. Thanks. Right, so very close to finishing now. What I tend to do at this point is go around the black areas on the figure, just make sure that I've got good coverage. That one's not too bad. I think you saw earlier that this had got chipped. I don't know what it is about the helmet crest, but that does seem to, more often than not, take a bit of a beating. And this was the figure I'd actually gone over. When I painted the helmet, I went over the horsehair crest, so we're going to deal with that now as well. Tidy that up a little bit. This is really just to make sure that when I put the contrast on for the helmet crest, we've obviously got the undercoat in place, and quite often, you know, to be honest, I just have this thing that if I'm going to paint the figure, make sure it's all painted and don't leave any chips in place, which I think is quite reasonable. So again, I don't want the metal showing through. I want to be the one creating the definition, and this is just quite a useful little part of the process where we can just do some tidying up. If you've got any other areas that you may have missed, or you think, oh, I went over something I shouldn't have done, if it's small enough, you can get away with probably putting a little bit of black on, and that will just darken the overall effect. If it's on things like the hair, just go careful that you don't obscure an ear or something. But again, I want to make sure that we've got good black coverage. Maybe not so much on the hair, because I quite like the colour variation if we have got a little bit, but that bit there, look, where we've got a definite sort of chip or area that's not covered, I want to deal with those. I've already sort of checked the beard areas and things like that in general when I went around and did the eyes, but now I might just put another little 5-minute check-in. So yeah, keep going with all of these. Make sure that everything, I'm happy with everything. And then we should be good to finish once we've done the highlight on this black. So let me finish checking everything out, make sure that everything's been covered, and I'll join you again on the video. Right, so pretty much for me the final stage is to take some dark grey and start applying it to places like the hair. And what I'm going to try and do here is follow the sort of line, if you like, that the sculptor has created on the figure, and just pick out enough that we can almost highlight the hair, if you see what I mean. So just do a bit of that on the figure. In this particular case, we've got a beard as well, so we'll take a little touch there, put that on the moustache and around the edges of the beard. And it's actually quite surprising how effective this is at just, as I say, creating that extra depth. I'm quite pleased with that. That's great. Same sort of process where we've got horsehair like this, and again a little bit different on the crest itself because I tend to just line it like this. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing. Apologies for that. Let's just try and hold it out at an angle like that. And I'm just trying to pick out enough really to, as I say, create that sort of definition. A bit more on the actual tail of the horsehair. And just run your brush across the surface. And that's really the sort of effect I'm going for. Excuse me. Catch the front. Just work that around. As I say, just run the brush along the top just to pick out some differential. There you go. A little bit more here on the beard. Looking pretty good. So again, just carry on all these figures in the same way. If you do a bit too much, don't worry, it does tend to dry a bit darker. And worst case, we can always go back and line it in with a bit of base black. There we go. So I tend to use the Foundry Triad, but I've also got Vallejo equivalents. But the Foundry Triad is the 34 sequence. But as I say, for me, this tends to be the last part of the process. Just picking out enough on the figure to actually pick out the raised portions of the hair. And I'm almost really using the same sort of tactic here as a dry brush, where we're just drawing it across the top of the sculpting. And sort of combining that with this lining effect around here. I tend to put relatively small amounts on the brush and then just repeat the process. Okay, same sort of thing on the reverse in this particular figure. And again, it's really difficult to do this entirely wrong. And again, at sort of the distances on a tabletop, that's going to look pretty effective. So yep, for me this is the last part, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about finishing and basing. Thanks. Okay, so I'm just about done now. I've been around all the figures, made sure everything's been painted, everything's got a mid and a highlight. I've got all of the areas covered. Pretty pleased with the way that they're going at the moment. More difficult now to perhaps see what they're going to look like on the tabletop, but just sort of scanning around some of the figures, if I can sort of zoom in a bit, you'll see that they're all pretty much getting there or thereabouts. Put some extra light on, perhaps. So yeah, quite pleased with the sort of contrast that I've got on the figures and how they're going in general. So now we're on to the final stage, which for me is to give them a varnish. Now, you can, this stuff is pretty good. So I'm going to shout out to this AK Interactive Ultra Matte varnish. It's the best I've ever used. I've been through various stages of trying to paint various manufacturers' matte coats on, and I've also used sprays. And from my personal experience, nothing is as good as this. I certainly haven't got any affinities with AK, and you've seen me use lots of different paints. It's just that this one is one that's going to stick with me in terms of usage. Now you can definitely paint the figures with a gloss, and this stuff will actually do the job of matting it down afterwards. I tend personally to just use perhaps a couple of coats of this stuff rather than do anything else. And actually we're going to come back once this is done, and I'm going to show you a technique that I use just on figures with metal armor. And what I actually do is I go over the top of it with a gloss varnish, but just on the armor parts. And for me personally, I think that's a really nice way to finish off the figure, because it accentuates the gloss of the armor without giving you that sort of toy soldier effect from the whole figure being glossed. And this really is a very forgiving varnish. You'll see that it sort of soaks in, and don't worry too much about it pooling. Obviously I try not to let it do too much of that, but I'm just making sure that all of the figure is covered, not just the bits that are going to be picked up or whatever, and get rid of some of the bigger clumps. Obviously at this stage I haven't put the shields on yet. That's going to be a separate video, and then probably we'll do the basing as a last stage. But just make sure, get rid of some of that so I can take some of it out. The one thing I do watch out for is the varnish getting caught between sections like that where we've got the armhole. Just make sure that you don't leave it sort of dripping in there, because this stuff is pretty good, but all varnishes can sort of pool if you're not careful. So it's really this simple. Just run round doing all the figures, making sure all of the areas are coated. Then I'll come back once they're all dry, give you a look, and maybe put some gloss on the armor, as I said earlier, and then you can make up your own mind about how well they're finished. But for me, so this video will end with that sort of final varnishing, and then we'll go into shields and how I paint them, followed by the basing. So see you shortly. Welcome back. As you can see, the varnish is now dry, and I don't know how that comes across on the camera, but that is a very flat varnish that we've achieved. I did talk a little while ago about putting some gloss varnish on, and the gloss varnish I use is just a simple Vallejo gloss varnish, just to lift the metal. However, I've gone back to base principles and said, look, this is what I'm trying to achieve here, is commonality or consistency, sorry, with the existing units in the army, and I didn't do those in the same way. So just to show you what that could look like, I've just put this Spartan hoplite here, and as you can see, it's just catching on the helmet there, and it's enough to sort of lift the metallic side of it without sort of, as I say, creating this sort of old school toy soldier effect. Now you pay your money and takes your choice. I don't know why I didn't do this the first time around for the Etruscans. Maybe I thought the look was better or whatever, but anyway, on this occasion I'm going to live with the figures being as they are, with this sort of flat finish. You can still obviously get the metallic impression, it's just not quite as stark as when I've put the subtle bits of gloss varnish on. However, that's me done now for these figures. They're all looking, well, I'm pretty pleased with them without trying to sound a bit arrogant. They're looking good. I know that obviously people can paint better than this, but you know what I always think about is what is this unit going to look like on the table, and you know what's the impression it's going to create. And I'm very pleased with what I've done there. I was a little bit worried that these might look a bit too bright with this red, but do you know what? There's only 5 figures in the unit like it, and I think spread out they're going to be fine. And if anything, it's going to sort of lift the overall impression of the unit. So before I go any further in terms of basing, what we're going to do now is switch to another video and look at how we paint the shields. So hopefully some of you will stick with me for that, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks.